pre-show quid pro quo. Dominique, you've got one question. It can be any question in the world. It can be, how am I doing? What's my favorite vegetable? Which plant is my favorite plant? It can be any question. Just go ahead and ask it.
So we're going back in time a little bit here. I say this like I don't ask this of people I know and my friends.
Okay.
So I'm gonna ask one of my weird ass standard questions, which is, who's your favorite Roman emperor and why? And problematic faves are acceptable.
Problematic fave is going to be Trajan. He was
That's a good choice.
Yeah, he was a very interesting figure. If people are not aware of Trajan, he's worth looking up and just seeing how he did things. In the Roman Senate, there was a inauguration that they would have where they would say, "May you be as fortunate as Augustus and better than Trajan." That always kind of stuck with me. I grew up with a father who loved the Hellenistic era, who loved the classical world, and he also loved the Romans, not as much as the Greeks, but he used to fill my head with stories of Roman emperors, and Trajan, just for some reason, he just really stuck with me. So, yes, complicated figure, but I think he's one of those Roman emperors that not enough people know, but he's worth definitely looking up. Perfect.
Good choice.
Thank you.
That's a good choice. Trajan is great.
Yeah, wonderful question, Dominique. Thank you so much for asking it. Hey everybody, welcome to What Magic Is This, a podcast ascending through every hierarchy of being. My name is Douglas Batchelor, and on this podcast we're going to be going through magic, the occult, the esoteric, the paranormal, the supernatural, and the weird. So if you've never tuned into the podcast before, how it works is that I give my guests a list of about 25 topics. They're a whole range of topics, and they get to pick one. Then I will bring them on the show. A lot of times I have them in the room recording with me, but sometimes I can record remotely, and this will be a remote recording. Yeah, that's how the show goes. And today I am joined by a very special guest by the name of Dominique. Dominique, how are you doing right now?
Well, like the rest of the world, I'm pretty stressed out, but we're hanging in there.
Interesting times. Always interesting times.
Oh yeah.
Dominique, would you say that you're a bit of a dabbler in the world of the occult? Would you say that you do a little bit of the magic?
I do some of the magics. Yeah, I do the mystical witchcraft shit. No, at this point, I just kind of consider myself like an all-around witch. I do a lot of folk. I play around with a lot of folk magic.
Good stuff.
I may not sound like it over the phone or even look like it, but I am Mexican American. I've been doing more folk magic with like stuff that La Santísima Muerte, which is easy to find because I live in a very Latin city. So
Perfect.
Do a lot of stuff like that, and I'm playing around with stuff that works and stuff from my history, which as a mixed kid is extensive.
Right.
So
wonderful. I love it. Fantastic. So we have a bit of a pro in our midst, which is great.
Oh God, no, I wish. I try.
Perfect. So we have a very interesting topic that you've chosen. It is the topic of Neoplatonism. And so we're going to get into it. Before we begin, there's going to be another disclaimer on this episode. I know there's quite a few disclaimers on episodes, but this is definitely one we have to put up there. This is not going to be a very fair episode about Neoplatonism. I'm just going to say right off the bat that I'm quite tired of Neoplatonism as a concept and as a philosophy and as a cosmology. It's been a bit of a strange week, as Dominique has put out there, so I'm feeling a bit cheeky, and Dominique's probably feeling a little bit cheeky, so we're going to be going into Neoplatonism. So if you don't feel like buying a ticket on this one, then please don't take the ride. But if you do, hang in there. It's gonna be a fun one. So, Dominique, are you ready?
I'm ready to go.
Perfect. So, Neoplatonism, what is it? Neoplatonism is a bit of a strange term. Now, nobody would have called themselves a Neoplatonist. The 19th century term Neoplatonism was retro-projected on ideas of Platonism and Pythagoreanism onto figures that would have just considered themselves Platonists. It influenced Jewish, Christian, and Muslim thought. But if we get down to bones, what Neoplatonism is a mystical trend in Western culture rooted in Hellenistic mysticism. Would you agree?
That sounds about right. Like, that's pretty much the bare bones description of it.
Yes, I spent some time because you can get very long-winded with Neoplatonism, not just in how it is defined, but just how it works. And with that, we will talk a bit about how Neoplatonism works. So there is no consensus because it's a bit of a slippery thing, but there's one thing that I think that we can definitely say about Neoplatonism, and that is the idea of monism, or one thing. The one thing above everything else. It's called many different names. You have the monad, you have the source, you could even just have something like the one. Classic philosophers, they had this idea of emanationism. Now, the most important thing about this monad, or this one thing, was that it was the most real. And as you move away from this, things get less real and less real and less real, and then there's us, which is the physical, which is matter, which is man, which is material. And this is seen as a little bit, I'm just going to say the word dirty for a lot of these philosophers. You've got realms, which are also called different things through time. You have the intelligible realm, which up there you have Plato's forms. I hope everybody knows what Plato's forms are. If not, you might want to find a different podcast or do a little bit more reading. Then you have the sensible realm, which is, as I mentioned, viewed with a bit of suspicion. But men are different. We are able to contemplate the intelligible realm and transcend this crude matter, this crude evil matter through contemplation, right? And as I mentioned, things are a little bit slippery. You have, through time, Neoplatonism gets reinterpreted and then reinterpreted and then reinterpreted over and over again, specifically Plato's philosophy. Yeah, it gets a little bit muddy. So it's a hard thing to definitely pin down, but you could say that Neoplatonism is a unified field theory. One has to prepare their mind for the one, or the monad, or the source. Everything within creation emanates. And what you need to know about Neoplatonism, when you get right down to it, is that there is definitely a hierarchy. It is a vertical form, or a vertical ascension. Things are stacked almost in a lot of ways. With that, we will get into a few of the figures of Neoplatonism. Enter Plotinus. He was 205 AD to about 270 AD. He was basically all around the Mediterranean. He was a figure in Alexandria. He's in a way considered the founder of Neoplatonism. He did have a teacher by the name of Ammonius Saccas, but there's a couple of other people that you could say that Neoplatonism started with. He was all about the emanations. He was also in the nous, or the divine mind. That's N-O-U-S, not N-E-W-S for everybody out there. Theurgy was his thing. Do you know what theurgy is Dominique?
I am very familiar with theurgy. I'm a former Hellenist, so I used to be a big part of Hellenismos, the reconstruction of the revivalism of ancient Greek religion. And theurgy ends up being like a big part of that. The lines between what is theurgy, what is witchcraft, and what is sorcery get pretty interesting, especially with modern definitions. But I mean, we'll get to that later, I guess. But yes, I'm familiar with theurgy and what is appropriate. And you put it well earlier when you said it's very much like the material realm is very dirty. And I'm like, yes, I'm familiar with that.
If you had to give a one-sentence description of theurgy, what would it be?
Theurgy is God work, in which you and the God kind of meld together, in a sense, to make yourself more, honestly.
Right.
The refinement of the self, make yourself more like a God, but maybe not quite a God, but maybe also a God. It depends on who you talk to there.
You know what? I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there. You used the D word, which was divine. Theurgy is divine work. So yes, that's exactly it.
Theurgy is God work versus like witchcraft, which is weird shit.
We'll get into that for sure. theurgy was big within Plotinus's cosmology, and he was also very big on the idea of meditation and contemplation. In a way, it's a very easy comparison to make, but a way of Zen almost, contemplation of the one. So before Plotinus, to a lot of the classical philosophers, specifically Plato and Aristotle and whatnot, you had matter came before spirit. But now that the Neoplatonists rolled in, you have spirit coming before matter. This is going to be a bit much, but please hang in there, because I'm going to go through Plotinus's cosmology, and you're welcome to jump in at any time, Dominique. So here we go. Everybody get out their piece of paper. Please take notes. So you ready? Okay, so you've got two realms here. You've got the intelligible realm and you've got the sensible realm. The intelligent realm contains what is called the source, or the one, and it forms a bit of a triangle, actually. So at the very top of the triangle, you have what is the one. The one contemplates or emanates the divine intellect. The divine intellect also has contained within it the ideas. The divine intellect also emanates and contemplates what's called the world soul. The world soul is the higher aspect of a part of the sensible realm, which is the cosmos. Matter itself is a part of the cosmos. Oh, also what everybody needs to know is that there are patterns that shift in between the intelligible realm and the sensible realm. Again, cosmos, matter. On the very edges of the sensible realm, you have what is called the limits of divine extension. And within the limits of divine extension, you have evil. Ooh, that terrible evil stuff. Everybody hates the evil. And within the cosmos, there's us, and we are made out of two parts. There is the rational, and then there is the animal. We are what could be considered the individual soul. We are different than animals due to the fact that we may, through contemplation, return to what is the divine intellect. And through the divine intellect, we become part of this thing called the one, part of the triangle. So did everybody get that? I hope everybody was taking notes. That is Plotinus's cosmology. All right, makes sense, everybody? Moving on. Perfect. Thank you.
Record time.
There you go. So a little bit confusing, huh? But we can kind of see, if we squint a little bit, the beginnings of what could be called the Cartesian ontological estrangement. But that's a whole other podcast episode. Another figure that we have contemporaneous with Plotinus is Porphyry. Now, we know of Plotinus's stees because of Porphyry. He has a book called Introduction to Categories, and this was the standard textbook on Neoplatonism in schools and universities kind of at the tail end of the medieval era. He was all about yearning for higher realms, but he said that you don't need to do theurgy to do this. Just do nothing. The soul will save itself. Contemplation is salvation, which is an interesting take. He also wrote a book called Against the Christians, which, as we are all well aware right now, it didn't really catch on and it didn't really work. So, moving on, we have a character also by the name of Proclus. He is from 410 AD to 485 AD. He expanded on Plotinus's hierarchy. So when I was talking about Plotinus and his cosmology, well, Proclus, he made it even more complex. Proclus is considered what's known as mature Neoplatonism. There was a lot of praying involved in Proclus's cosmology or version of Neoplatonism. He said that prayer was the meeting of soul and divinity. He was also a strange cat. He was a bit of a mystic. He thought that you could ensoul statues. He would do invocations to Hecate. He thought that he could control the weather. So we're dealing with some weird people. Are you aware of Proclus at all, Dominique?
Passing familiar, but I recognize the rhetoric. I recognize a lot of the theory there. I mean, the stuff with Hecate is always so interesting.
Always.
I'm a big fan of Hecate, but like whether or not Hecate is a goddess of witchcraft, is a titan of witchcraft, like the patron of witchcraft, or if she's a patron of theurgy is always up for debate, and the debates are fierce.
They certainly are. If there's one thing that occultists like to do, it's debate. What can you do? Everybody's right. Areopagus from 245 AD to 325. Now, I like Areopagus. There's much to like about Areopagus. He talks about demons having a function and that they will follow your lead if instructed or abjured. which is pretty cool because I'm all about them instructing them demons. He disagreed with Porphyry about ritual. He said that no, you just can't sit around and think about the divine. You actually have to do some ritual work to get to the divine itself. To get close to the divine gods, it requires more than just sitting around and doing nothing. He would say that you could summon or call on entities to assist in your divine work or your theurgy, but he did do this one thing in which he said that theurgy is good, and all the other stuff, magic, is bad. He wrote a book called De Mysteris Egyptiorum, which is actually pretty good shit. I would suggest people, if there's one book by the Neoplatonists or one text by the Neoplatonists that they should read, that I would suggest this is it. So yeah, definitely check that up. Of all the Neoplatonists, I can get behind Areopagus for numerous reasons. He's my cup of tea. He's not my favorite cup of tea, but he is certainly my cup of tea. So we're doing a lot of talking. And this all seems pretty Greek, fairly Mediterranean. When does Christianity get involved with Neoplatonism? Because it certainly does. So we have Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite. Enter Christianity. One of my friends, I had him on the alchemy episode. I asked him ages ago, what would you say is the defining characteristic of Neoplatonism outside of the early Neoplatonists? And he put it very bluntly. He said they have their feet in two different places, one foot in Plato and the other foot in Christianity. And I cannot disagree with this. Dionysius the Areopagite, he was 5th to 6th century. We don't really know exactly when he was born or when he died, but we can say this. He was all about them angels. He had a hierarchy of heaven. So before this, there was a little bit of hierarchy, but he was the one that really nailed it down through a book called Celestial Hierarchy. That's where we have, up at the very top, you've got God, and then a little bit further down, you've got the archangels, and even below them, you've got cherubim, the seraphim, all of that kind of stuff. That's from Pseudo-Dionysius, the Areopagite. He was big on the Eucharist as theurgy. He said that that was the highest form of theurgy. Emanation through Dionysius became divine procession. Through Dionysius, we also have the idea of a guardian angel for each human being. That is something that has, I would say, hoodwinked a lot of occultists. I don't know if you would agree, Dominique.
I was all like, oh, this motherfucker, that's who did it. Like, to be fair, I feel like the Eucharist is, like, as an ex-Catholic, I feel like the Eucharist is a form of theurgy, defined by the right terms.
Absolutely.
But I'm also, like, the personal guardian angel, I'm like, this motherfucker, this is the guy who beat up in an alley with a baseball bat with nails.
He's an interesting character. He's one of those people that I don't think a Wikipedia page, at least his Wikipedia page, does enough to truly flesh out his influence on not just Neoplatonism, but Christianity in general. One of those hidden puppet masters of Christianity that not a lot of people know about, but you heard it here first, so please look up Dionysius the Areopagite. He was hugely influential on a lot of writers, specifically Meister Eckhart and Germans. They were very enamored with Neoplatonism, specifically Neoplatonism and Christianity through Dionysius the Areopagite. There's a whole ton of other figures. You have Clement of Alexandria, you have Augustine of Hippo, you have Origen. There's just too many to go through. So, as you do, it's not that they stayed dormant, but Neoplatonism morphed, and it came back in a huge way in the Renaissance, specifically in Italy. So it was rediscovered in a way. Some people would call this Neoplatonism. To me, it's all part of the package. It's still Neoplatonism. And so you have a figure like Cosimo de' Medici. He was really big on a gentleman by the name of Gemistos Plethon, who was a Byzantine fellow who said that we should try and bring back the Hellenistic gods. Very interesting person. He was called the Second Plato. If you have read a book called The Game of Saturn by Peter Mark Adams, he goes into all of Domestos and the Medicis and all of the Florentine fun that occurred in and around this point. It's a real trip of a book, and I would suggest it for anybody that is interested in a very interesting slice of history, and specifically a slice of the Renaissance, which we know a lot about, but some of the, I would say, underlying ideals that aren't talked about in history class in grade 11.
Surprising amount of Borgia shit in here.
Yeah.
Wonderful Borgia's in there. Like just a sprinkle, but worth it.
For sure. So Cosimo Medici, he was a huge fan of Domestos. He was also a fan of a dude who he was in regular contact with by the name of Marsilio Ficino. Now, there's a story that's a little bit apocryphal about Cosimo wanting, he had commissioned Ficino to do a translation of Plato, of a lot of Plato's works. Then Ficino got a copy of the Corpus Hermeticum, written, of course, by Hermes Trismegistus, and Medici told Ficino, "Put down Plato. I'm dying. I need you to translate the Corpus Hermeticum. It's a much bigger text." The reason it's apocryphal is because Plato is huge, and there's a lot of stuff, and the Corpus Hermeticum is actually quite small. So it was probably a time-saving heuristic measure more so than a one of importance. But as we are occultists, we are huge fans of the big story, are we not? But what we need to know about Ficino is that he was all about natural magic. If you listened to the Agrippa episode, and no doubt I will do a program on Marsilio Ficino, he's a very interesting person. Agrippa was a huge figure as well with Neoplatonism, and it was through Agrippa and his love of Pico della Mirandola, as well as Jonathan Reuchlin. A bit of Kabbalism gets mixed in there, of course, with Neoplatonism and having the Sephiroth and the spheres and the Ein Sof and Ein Sof Ur, all of that fun stuff. If this doesn't make any sense to you, eventually I will get to Kabbalism. Please be patient, but yeah, we'll get there. So Neoplatonism was, in the Renaissance, was just kind of applied to absolutely everything. And a good metaphor to think about is trying to spread restaurant butter that hasn't been thawed properly. You get the butter and you have the bread, and you take the little nub of Neoplatonic butter and you try and spread it on the bread, and you don't really get it spread. You just kind of ruin the bread. That's what happened in the Renaissance. So I forget who said that wonderful little metaphor, but I love it, so I'm going to use it. And not just spreading across different philosophies, it spread to magic as well. And I think that of all the people, Ficino, he said he was just doing natural magic. I don't really know about that. I can't just see him in his home just making a talisman and pondering the night sky. I think he did a little bit more demon work than he lets on. But it was interesting times in the Renaissance, and yeah, there was a lot of witchcraft happening. To say that Neoplatonism being applied to magic, it was a fantastic way to not get burnt, basically putting it that way. So the love of classical philosophers meant that you weren't doing demonic magic. And as I mentioned, I think Ficino definitely was doing something more than what he said. The vertical hierarchy that existed within Neoplatonism was certainly applied to magic. Agrippa did not help this in any way, shape, or form. Neoplatonism became the de facto metaphysics for how magic works. And Kabbalah falls a victim to this as well. What you have is a structure. This is a very important thing to something that beforehand didn't really have a complete A to B structure. With Neoplatonism, they definitely got back. And so going forward from the Renaissance, you have I'm going to say an imaginary idea of the past, specifically with things like Egypt. You have the idea of the perennial philosophy that there's been this idea that we've lost, that there was a way that we navigated the world that we've just somehow forgotten, that we can get back, and it started in Egypt. And then that moved forward into Rosicrucianism, into Freemasonry, into the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, Thelema, Wicca, Neo-paganism. It's gone from there. What we need to understand, which a lot of people do not understand, specifically if you start on magic, is that this whole Neoplatonism application to magic was a veneer. And there's no other way I can put it. It was a veneer, and it was a very useful one at the time. We can't degrade its importance for helping people like Ficino and Agrippa not get burned at the stake.
A lot of magic especially in Italy, in like medieval and Renaissance times was literally just demon worship. I think one of my favorite stories is of like a monastery, like I want to say, the ones I can't stand, Dominicans.
Dominicans, yeah.
Yeah. That's how I remember them. That's how I remember them. I'm like, oh, where are they landing? Like, it was the Dominicans who were absolutely summoning demons, and like the whole monastery summoning demons. And when they got found out by the inquisitors that were sent to them, they were like, well, surely Jesus called and sent forth demons, and so what I'm doing is rather like our Lord Jesus.
That's right.
And they got away with it. And
Yep.
even though the church was undoubtedly like, no, that's an incorrect takeaway, but that's what happened. There was another story, I think it was actually featured in the Game of Saturn, about a famous courtesan who was found by the inquisitors to have an altar up in which she sacrificed some blood and burned things of her rivals and chanted. And it was definitely to Satan. And when she was asked about it, she said, no, I'm not a Satanist. I pray to God every day. This is just part of my due. I am purging myself of the bad feelings.
Right.
And she got she got away with it. And so this was like an everyday thing in medieval magic, which was primarily done by clerics. Was demon summoning, was binding of demons, what we would now and what was then called Goetia. It was definitely like the bread and butter of magic back then was necromancy. And what we considered to be necromancy. And so like the fact of the matter is that a lot of people who were important in Neoplatonism in the Renaissance practiced necromancy.
Necromancy, nigromancy, yeah, it's that whole thing. There was a huge, as you said, huge clerical underground, huge amount of magic going through the cloisters and through the monasteries. It's very interesting. There's an author by the name of Sophie Page who has written, I think, 1 or 2 books about this, and it's definitely worth checking out. It's great for absolutely everybody. You are entirely correct, Dominique. Yes, this nigromancy was real, but for a lot of people, they said, oh, I'm a Neoplatonist, or I'm doing...
I'm a Christian.
I'm a Christian.
This is perfectly normal for Christians to do. Jesus also told demons where and when to go and how to jump how high. And, I'm following in our Lord's footsteps.
So what we need to realize is that, yes, a lot of the times it was a complete veneer. What happened is that we confused a protective measure for what soon became the very way that we measure magic, if you will, and how magic works. Again, I'm not doing conjuration. I'm doing theurgy. A wink. For some strange reason, this has stuck, and this hierarchical, vertical structure of Neoplatonism was at first a veneer, and then it just became the thing that stuck, which is very unfortunate. But we're starting to see nigromancy coming back in a very big way. What do I think about Neoplatonism? Because I know that's what you're all here for. If I mentioned at the beginning of the program I'm not a fan, you guys are all no doubt wondering, what's Doug actually think about Neoplatonism? So here it is. I don't like it at all. I love the artwork. I will say that. Things like Jacob Burma, I've got 3 of his paintings on my wall. My house is kind of covered with strange alchemical paintings and whatnot. I love the art that came from Neoplatonist thinking. It's all good. We can't not say that Neoplatonism didn't have a vast influence. It certainly did. Make no mistake about it. But had it halted at Areopagus, I'd be fine with Neoplatonism. I really, really would. But it didn't. This idea of fitting absolutely everything into neat little boxes, everything's got its place and it stays here. There's the vertical structure. It's more in line with a thinking that comes from the mystery tradition than the magical tradition. And that's why a lot of orders, like the Golden Dawn, like Freemasonry, like the Lima, like Wicca and Neopaganism, it likes this idea of order. It really does. The world is chaos. Let's find some order for it. The whole idea that there's a linear progression for magic, it comes from Neoplatonism as well. That just, it doesn't sit right with me. And I've said it many times in my podcast, this idea that you don't have to do spells. All you have to do is contemplate or sit and meditate, and then that somehow makes you a magician. It infuriates me. So I do understand that in a way Neoplatonism did inform the grimoires and grimoire magics a great deal, specifically through Areopagus and his idea that demons, they have a place, and that if they are given orders, they will follow those orders without knowing what is true and what is false. Yes, there are things about Neoplatonism that are okay. But I say, everybody, just have a look at it. Have a look at Neoplatonism. I'm not saying stay away, but have a look. Please realize, though, that Neoplatonism and magic are not the same thing. Metaphysics are important, but you need to stay fluid. There's never one thing. We've looked for this one thing for as long as we've been around, and chances are we will never find this unified field theory of existence. Multi-level models are the way to go, underpinned by a kind of base ontology, I'd say. And there are better cosmologies and metaphysics than Neoplatonism. There's tons. Has anybody tried animism, perhaps? Just saying. I don't see things as a vertical line or an A to B. I think in ecosystems, and ecosystems within ecosystems is a very good way of looking at the world. But I'd say for people that really want to get a base metaphysics on magic, look for something parsimonious. Do not multiply unnecessarily. And also, do not go for monism. That is not parsimonious in any way. It's very, very easy. I don't know if I should say this, but I'm going to say it anyway, and who knows, I might cut it. I had somebody, they were bothered by the fact that I didn't believe in one mind. Well, first of all, that says way more about you than it does me. And the other thing is, explain mind. Like, give me a definition of what mind is. It's a very tricky term. And don't define mind by defining something else. So what is mind? Oh, mind is the energy that... No, you're not talking to me about mind. You're telling me about something else. I like animism as it doesn't see matter as evil. People who've listened, they know that I hate materialism. Doug, you hate matter. You hate materialism. It's not that I hate matter. I just think that our way of looking at matter is incomplete, and we need to confront this. We know for a fact that some strange way that mind, whatever that is mattered. I don't think we know right now how much matter is minded. How does matter's agency work? That is something that is interesting for me. It is incomplete, as I said. Instead of looking for the answers for this kind of stuff, we need to look at the questions. That is far more important. Magical efficacy does not come from certainty. Stick with the uncertainty. Incomplete models, they are important ones because their incompleteness is a feature. It is not a bug. Deferring to Plato and Neoplatonism holds your ontology in a just-so story. My story is being written still. I go on enchanting, using curiosity as a paramount epistemology. And I will say this quote that I've said quite often, and I don't know if I've said it yet on my podcast, but I like the quote by Uspensky, who said that the meaning of life is in seeking, and it is only through seeking that we find new realities. Dominique, what kind of things do you feel? Do you have a certainty in your background metaphysics for magic, or are you just a constant seeker like myself?
I like to feel around. Like, that sounds really basic, but I like to feel for what's true. And what's true isn't always like a set platitude. It tends to be a feeling, like there's a buzz, there's a feeling of meaning. A large part of my problem with Neoplatonism is something that you've addressed and that I may have alluded to a couple times, is the whole concept of something that is dirty versus something that is clean. The concept of theurgy as the only type of clean magic, because if you do Goetia, you're trafficking with demons, and demons are naughty and bad. And if you do witchcraft, then you're just a superstitious old hag somewhere, aren't you? And there is, and I wish I could say that was limited to the past, but it's unfortunately not.
No.
There are a number of modern Neoplatonists that do hold with that. And then when you try to tell them, well, this is what I do with my witchcraft, they go, well, that's not really witchcraft, is it then? It's theurgy. And maybe we should reconsider what you're doing. And it's annoying. Don't tell me what I'm doing. I know full well what I'm doing. Fuck off, gringo. Like, very frustrating. It's so frustrating. Like, it is insanely frustrating to do your stuff with La Santa Muerte and to be told, well, then, that's technically like a form of theurgy. So, like, maybe it's not actually witchcraft at all. Man, fuck off. What the fuck do you know? Like, It's like you're being told what you're doing, but it's also, again, and this I think is it's a very Hellenic sort of view, and you bring up good points when you talk about Neoplatonism and how it's kind of spread over a lot of things that don't work for it, because I noticed the same thing with a lot of Hellenic concepts, and it's almost the downside to ancient Hellenism being so well documented and so well preserved, is that a lot of these tenets get applied to things when it's not relevant.
No.
It's in my time in neo-paganism, I've noticed a lot. For example, two big concepts that I see a lot of is miasma and hubris.
Right.
And hubris, for example, is a late Attic invention.
Okay.
So it doesn't even harken back to like ancient times, you know, like it's very much a more recent invention on the Greeks. And a lot of the stories that they use for hubris, Niobe comes to mind, Arachne even, it's very much like almost a corruption of what could have been an original myth that we don't have the source material for anymore. And then again, of course, all we have is what survived from Athens. We have patchwork, if nothing, if Athenian focused nothing, of any other city-states at the time. So a large part of what we have, unfortunately, goes through Athens, which unfortunately does get filtered through Platonism. Miasma is the big one.
Mm-hmm.
Miasma is the big one that I have a problem with, and that's, again, directly related to how dirty or how clean you are. Modern Hellenists will say that's not true, but it essentially is.
Right.
It essentially is about your spiritual cleanliness versus your spiritual uncleanliness. The whole concept of being spiritually unclean to the point where you can't even talk to your God. Mm-hmm. Just to say, hey, I'm having a hard time. Can I lay here for a minute? It's kind of bullshit. And also like insanely ahistorical, because we have myths of like the heroes coming covered in blood and gore from the battlefield, invoking their gods, and their gods being like, yeah, I'll do you solid. Rape victims showing up in temples. Cassandra is one that I think of.
Yes.
Like prominently from the Iliad, who showed up in the temple after Ajax raped her, and that's theorized, and that in some stories that's why Agamemnon met his downfall. Those people would have been considered unclean by Neoplatonists because of the spiritual impurity that was invoked upon them, or that they invoked on themselves.
Right.
Sorry, I have a lot to say about this.
No doubt. I love it. To put it bluntly, Neoplatonism is a cul-de-sac. And you have two options when you enter this cul-de-sac. One is you hit the end and you just stay there. And the other one is that you turn your ass around and you find yourself another path. So by all means, study Neoplatonism. Classical Neoplatonism, Renaissance Neoplatonism. Give yourself a month. Just look. No more than a month, please, but give yourself a month. See what works in it. See where the faults are. Have a look at the verticality. Realize the verticality in the hierarchy and see, this is where a lot of things started. See where you have the problems. Stacking is counterproductive. And I will say this, stacking is different than layering. When I say stacking, that is, you can't do this until this happens, and you can't do that. Once you're there, you have to do something else to get to, that's stacked. Layering weaves in and out with each other. My father was a geologist. You can look at sedimentary rock layers, you'll see that some of them don't exactly stay in a complete stacked pattern. They kind of weave in and out of each other. That's a good way of thinking of this. But avoid monism. It is lazy. And I know people will say, well, Doug, you're a fan of idealism. I'm a fan of idealism a little bit. The idea that consciousness is everything. Yeah, I get it. But if you want, hey, have you tried some animism? I'm just saying. But the idea that everything is consciousness, they have a huge problem with the idea of magic and a huge problem with the idea of spirits, which is my jam. The point of Western magic is spirit contact. But monism, it's a bit much. It's a bit much, and it's not enough at the same time. The best way that I can put it is, what would you rather see? Would you rather see a full orchestra, or would you rather see a one-man band? Sure, you're on the street, a one-man band, it's fun. One person making all of this music, it's pretty cool. But after about 5 minutes, you get a little bit tired, and then you toss your coin in the open guitar case, and you're on your way. That's monism. But those that adhere to Neoplatonism have a dog in the fight. We need to recognize this. Things like the Golden Dawn, Freemasonry, Thelema, Kabbalism in some respect, anything that is stacked in a hierarchy. In some respect, Neoplatonism is a very human philosophy, as a lot of Greek and Hellenistic thought is. It's quick to judge, and it is slow to change. I'm glad, if not a little disheartened at the same time, that a lot of people think that they've figured it out. Great, you figured it out. That you have seated inquiry and found comfort in the one thing. But I will invoke the late, great Robert Anton Wilson by saying that anybody who tells you they know exactly what is going on is probably full of shit. Me, I would take one witch doing spells, not having any idea how or why it works, over 1,000 pseudo-occultist philosophers doing no spells, but attesting to the fact that they know exactly how or why it works. But I ask you this. Which side of the scenario do you think you would be on? Where would you find yourself? Holding the kindling torch or hugging the pyre stake? And this is important. Certainty is dangerous. Let's stay beyond the limits of divine extension. Let's stay in the deep end of the sensible realm. Let's keep magic evil. And that's the show.
You know what the thing is it's like, this is something that, as a former Reconstructionist, I have this conversation a lot. Mm-hmm. There's always the conversation about, like, well, this is how they did it. This is how they did it. They were rape apologists. They did this. They did that. They owned slaves. What are you going to do about it? I'm like, okay, leave those parts behind. Like, you can leave them in the past where they belong and say, that was fucked up and we're not going to do that. Like, you can take the parts that serve you. I know that at some point, every occultist, this has to be a thing, because I know I did it. I know my boyfriend did it. I'm sure you did it, Doug. We all go through that point. We go, I don't listen to remakes.
Right.
I only listen to the original. I bought the album for the original so I can prove to you how fucking authentic I am.
Right.
You gotta grow out of it. Like, you're 15 years old. You're gonna grow up. Like, you gotta stop playing the old hits over again and be like, damn, the remix was good. Like, yes. At some point when do you go, like, dang, I actually really like Nightcore. Like, you take things that work and ditch the shit that doesn't. And that's the beauty of working, as long as you acknowledge where it comes from. As long as you know what's going on, what's happening, and we can talk about how these things are melding together, you can say, oh yeah, they used to do this and that was shitty and we left it behind. Preserving shit that doesn't work, or preserving shit that's just, quite frankly, disgusting in a tradition because that's how they've always done it, it's bullshit. And it's hilariously what a lot of occultists despise about modern day Christianity, keeping stuff because they say this is how we've always done it.
Right.
Ironically, when it's not, but I mean, you know.
I love it, Dominique. So, where to go, everybody? Because I know you're super interested in Neoplatonism now. I say go anywhere. I'll have some show links and some show notes within my website. There'll be some stuff there. You do need to know about Neoplatonism. Do your own research without an agenda. And yeah, I know this episode had an agenda. Get your own podcast. Please, if you want to talk about this, get your own podcast. But please don't write me. I don't debate online like I wouldn't play chess with pigeons. I'm not a philosopher. I'm a fucking magician.
Don't at Doug on this.
No.
Don't at me. Like, this is what it is. Boom, mic drop.
There are tons of podcasts about esotericism and philosophy. My podcast is not about philosophy. So, with that, Dominique, you made it to the end. How do you feel? Did you get something off your chest? Sounded like you did.
I did.
Wonderful.
That was years in the making. Good God.
I hope you feel some kind of catharsis. So for those of you interested, head to whatmagicisthis.com. There you can subscribe to my podcast on iTunes, on Google Play, on YouTube. I've got Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Radio Public. There's a little button on there you can click to get connected to any Android device. Tune-in's on there. If they've got podcasts, I'm listed. Also on my website, you will find links to my Twitter account, which I use quite a bit now. I'm getting a little bit better at it. To my Instagram account, I'm still trying. Even today, I had to figure out how. You can actually call somebody on on Instagram and talk to them through video? What magic is this, is what I said.
No.
But you'll find a link to Instagram there. Also find my Facebook page. I don't use it too much. It's a bit more of an afterthought. Yeah, that's just how I'll put it. Also on my webpage, you're going to find show notes. I go out of my way for those show notes. I really do, and they're usually very fascinating. So if you find something that I've said that is very interesting, head there. There will most likely be a ton to go off. Many directions you can go. If you have any questions, people, please reach out to me. I am very contactable. I will get back to you usually pretty quickly, unless I'm, swamped, but I'm not these days for somewhat apparent reasons. I'm not going to say anything about that. We live in interesting times. But if you have a question, please reach out. If you love the podcast, guys, please leave a review for my podcast, either on iTunes or any of the other platforms, just telling me, hey, I like the show. Or, there's the whole click the stars. Clicking the stars is nice, but doing a little bit of writing, that's a little bit better. Also on my website, and this is somewhat new, I have a survey up on my website for people to get a little bit more involved in what topics we're going to be talking about. If you go to whatmagicisthis.com, you will find the survey. It will be up until the end of April, and you can click about 50 topics. You get 10 picks. You can click which topics you really, really want. I think right now, Austin Osman Spare is at the very top, followed by Kabbalism, followed by Hermeticism. Some of the ones that I would have expected to be up at the top, like astrology, are not, so that's an interesting one. But yes, I will say this. I've only had 35 responses so far, and it's been up for about 10 days, so I know that there's more than 35 of you. I know for a fact. And so I will also invoke every dad that has existed since democracy by saying, you can't complain if you don't vote. So head to whatmagicisthis.com to get that survey. It will be up until the end of April. And with that, that's the end of the program. Dominique, we have to end this with the post-show quid pro quo. Are you ready?
I'm ready. I've girded my loins and everything.
Perfect. Dominique, do you have an animal guide? And if you do, what is your animal guide? And for those that don't know, it's not necessarily your favorite animal. It's an animal that can come to you through dreams, or can come to you actually IRL. It's something that helps to guide or to provide comfort. It performs many functions.
There's an animal form that's been showing up more, and that is, I feel, incredibly appropriate. Like I live in Texas, so
right.
The animal that's been showing up a lot lately is the coyote.
Nice.
And there is definitely a feeling of rewilding to it.
Got it.
I've been starting, and then I keep putting back down because I'm like, this is overwhelming me. I have to put this down. Clarissa Pinkola Estes, Women Who Run with Wolves.
Okay.
And it is very much about the rewilding of the feminine spirit and the rewilding of your soul. And the whole concept of like giving it up and going back into stories and finding an authentic path through story, through fairy tales, through stories, through legends. It's funny because she like grew up Hungarian and also like Latina, and I'm Slavic and Latina, so it makes for an interesting parallel. But yeah, the coyote has been showing up a lot. A coyote woman shows up a lot.
Very cool.
And sometimes a lobo woman shows up a lot, which is really fun and interesting.
Since
I live on the brink of the borderlands here, it's all like the entryway to the borderlands. It's always a very interesting thing. Coyotes show up here. Like they actually showed up at one of our old apartment complexes. Like they used to roam around and hunt the deer.
Mm-hmm.
They would the deer would come up to our patio, and they would just chill, and the coyotes would come after them.
Are you aware of cynocephaly, which is different than lycanthropy, which is werewolves or that kind of thing? Mm-hmm. It's human beings with dog heads. Saint Christopher. Saint Christopher is seen quite a bit with the dog head. You have Hermanubis, there's Anubis, plenty of other figures, but they're usually seen as keepers of the gates, or gatekeepers. I know for a long time, specifically in Eastern Europe, St. Christopher would be put on bridges or at entrances to the city. So it's strange that you're seeing coyotes, kind of where you, as you mentioned, actual physical liminal space, almost as a gatekeeper itself. So it's appropriate.
Yeah, and the fun thing about coyotes is you usually see them on their own, but they are intensely familial. They run in like really familial packs, which is really, but you don't see them that way. You only ever see one at a time. Usually because only one goes scouting out, and I feel that intensely. Like
I love them. I love them to death.
All of those are gone. And they're conserving them in New York. Like is being conserved in New York. It's incredibly tragic. So this is what used to be Mexico. So
Yep.
like Mexican wolf is almost dead.
Yeah. Yeah. But, I mean, let's try to end this on a happy note. They are, some of them are bouncing back.
Coyotes are literally everywhere,
Yes,
and to
they
the
are.
point where you have to, where like sometimes when you start seeing too many of them, the city will be like, "Hey, don't forget, coyotes will eat your pets, so please keep them inside." Okay, thank you.
Yep. Yep.
Like I've definitely seen coyotes while walking my dog before.
Yep,
Not like
absolutely.
in a weird menacing way, but like in a way that was like, "Oh, those are eyes." So,
Fantastic, Dominique. This has been a wonderful program. I'm glad we did this one. I really am. I'm glad to finally get this out there. My feelings about Neoplatonism, and yeah, this has been an absolute pleasure. And we'll definitely talk to you sometime again in the future on this podcast. So thank you for being here, Dominique. It was great.
anytime.
Perfect. So that's the show, everybody. My name is Douglas Batchelor. You've been listening to What Magic Is This? We will talk at you soon. Stay luminous. Bye-bye.